and that should resolve the problem. So hopefully today we won't have any issues. And a reminder also, with the voting cards, over lunch or over the evening or any breaks, please take them with you, keep them safe, and please don't leave them in the microphone slots when they are unattended. In a moment, we will resume our discussions on Proposal 48, which we suspended yesterday afternoon. But before that, I want to just talk about the order of items that I intend to take today. Yesterday, we finished a couple of agenda items behind. We were going to continue with Proposal 51 on Kaya and related document 84.3, and then go on to Proposal 45 on rhodiola with related document 84.4. I don't intend to follow that order into today. The agenda item, the working program rather, set out that this morning we intended to cover tree species or timber species. So there has been on the screens earlier the list of proposals in the order I mean to take them. So this morning we'll begin with Proposal 48 and conclude that. We will then move on to the related document 84.2. Subsequently, we will take proposals in numerical order for those relating to tree species. So we will go 44, 46, 47, 49, 50, and then 51 with related document 84.3. That is probably an ambitious schedule for today, and we may not get all the way through those. But if not, we will consider what to do later. In the afternoon, we will stick to the working program, and we will begin at 2 p.m. with what are called marine species in inverted commas, because some of the species are freshwater, of course. So we will start at Proposal 37 and work through to Proposal 42. At the beginning of the afternoon session, I will consider how we are going to use the evening session. We have a range of working documents there, which we do need to address, of course. But if we've got some proposals that we haven't been able to consider from this morning, or even this afternoon, we might potentially look to place them in the evening session. But I will give you clarity on that at the beginning of this afternoon session. So I hope that is an acceptable way forward for everyone, and that you all understand the way I intend to deal with the proposals today. So with that, yesterday afternoon, we were discussing Proposal 48. There was a request to suspend the debate on that to enable consultations, a request from the European Union. So I'm going to go back to the European Union now and ask them if they have been able to undertake consultations or have come up with a suggested way forward. So, EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and with your indulgence, I would like to ask you to ask Colombia to present the results.
Certainly, I will give the floor to Colombia. I see Bolivia, you're requesting the floor, but I'll begin with Colombia. So you have the floor.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Having heard the comments from the parties yesterday, and on behalf of the co-proponents, we present the proposal by removing the annotation for seeds, and we're also aware of the challenges that that represents for all of us as distribution and range states. We suggest an amendment of an 18-month delay in entry into force. We hope that will be considered by the parties to allow us to adopt the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. Just one moment. So, thank you, Colombia, with your suggested amendment, which I think we've captured, which would be to remove seeds from the suggested annotation, so it would then become annotation #17, and you are proposing an 18-month delay in implementation. So I recognize yesterday that there was a number of parties who were concerned about this proposal and felt very strongly about it, and I would like to go around and ask them in turn whether they feel that they could live with this proposed amendment, whether it is an acceptable way forward to them, and that whether we can find consensus here. But I see already that Bolivia have requested the floor, so I give the floor to you, Bolivia.
Muy buenos días, señor presidente.
Good morning, Chair. Bolivia would like to ask, and on behalf of more than the 20 indigenous nations and the 50 families that make them up, we would like to have a consideration of a working group being established so that we can look at the details with the participation of the proponents, Colombia, Panama, and the European Union, of course. And we'd like to invite other colleagues from the United Kingdom, the United States, and other members here at the COP, and states who have sustainable management plans, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru. We'd like them to join us so we can find a short-term and plausible solution for the indigenous peoples, because they are those who will be most affected by the changes, and we would be forcing the disappearance of these cultures. We understand that in countries of South America, we strongly value the cultural identity of our indigenous peoples. We have to take care of them because they form part of the identity and biodiversity of the forests. They live in symbiosis with their environment. So I would, with all due respect, request that that be taken into account so we can establish a working group and have an in-detail analysis which will help us arrive at a solution that will take into account the reality of these peoples and work together and collaborate on the implementation of this proposal. So thank you, Chair. I hope that this request may be followed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia, and I note your request. I will go around and get the views of other parties as well first, so I can form a kind of bigger picture, really, of where things are headed. So I give the floor to Peru, followed by Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. We'd like to thank the co-proponents for the proposal made today. However, we were saying that we should insist on the delay and the timeline of 24 months that we suggested, and we'd like to say what this implies. This timeline gives adequate time for budgetary matters, for the setting up of guidelines, ensuring we sort out the minimum harvesting diameter, and that we ensure we respect the logging and harvest cycle of these species. And it allows, as Bolivia has said, us to involve the many populations and local actors involved in the management of the species. And it's also important and a challenge for the parties, and this was also mentioned in the proposal for inclusion. It's the subject of species identification. Peru, as we've said yesterday, has carried out a genetic study to define the species that are distributed in our country. This allowed us, for example, to show that we only have 3 species. We have Micranta, Férrea, and Charapilla. However, it's necessary to develop keys for the dendrological identification for those trees that will be inventoried. And we also need to look at the anatomical characteristics of the timber. So we need a cautious amount of time so we can have a scientific work that is carried out well. And we also wanted to specify that Peru is developing, it makes its NDFs using the 9-step guide that was drawn up by Traffic and the German scientific authorities. So this and the application of this guide ensures that we have reliable data on the species populations, and it helps us with dealing with many other subjects such as management, implementation, control and enforcement. And we're going to have to implement in the field a whole series of verifications which are currently not carried out. So that means that for Peru, as one of the main countries which harvest the species, we need time to do that. We recognize the importance of conserving the Jihuahuaco tree because it plays a very important ecological role in its habitat. It's a habitat for many species, and to do this, we have to do it responsibly in a suitable manner. So we think that the timeline that we had requested of 24 months would be the minimum necessary to be able to undertake this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. I will give the floor to Brazil. You have the floor, and I see a request from the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. And good morning to all. We appreciate the effort made by the proponents in trying to adapt their proposal, particularly when excluding CITES from the annotation. However, the proposal is not acceptable for Brazil. I will refrain from repeating the arguments I set out yesterday, but I need to remember that Brazil has a firm position in the sense that the genus does not meet the requirements for inclusion in Appendix 2. Finally, we want to express support for the proposal made by Bolivia for the creation of a working group on this proposal, where the parties can promote a broad debate on dipteryx. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I will give the floor to the United Kingdom, and then I will maybe come back to the proponents for their reflections on this request for a working group. But the United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK still has strong reservations that an 18 or 24-month delay of implementation will have negative consequences for the species, but also sets a dangerous precedent for future species listings. The UK believes that prior to the COP, consultation between co-proponents and range states could have mitigated some of these issues. We would encourage range states, if they're expecting to have implementation issues, to explore other support offered by the Secretariat, such as the Compliance Assistance Programme, to aid in the implementation of this or any other species listing. We would like to We would like any delay to be limited to no more than 12 months, in line with previous decisions of the COP, for example, relating to the umbrella species list at 18, but would be happy to join any future working group as proposed by Bolivia to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. So yesterday in debate, we heard, as I said, opposition from Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, and also Guyana. So I'd quite like to hear from Guyana, if they're in the room, if they have anything to say, any reflections on the amended proposal by the proponents, by Colombia. Guyana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would want to align myself with the comments made by the UK just now. Guyana still has a problem supporting the proposal, even in its amended form.
Thank you. I see a request for the floor from India, so I'll give the floor to you, and then I will try and come up with a way forward, but I may go back to the proponents soon about that. So India, you have the floor.
In recent COPs, we have observed a trend of proposals to be list entire genera of plant species on the appendices based on the lookalike criteria, as opposed to the individual species. Chair, we would like to emphasize that this approach is neither reasonable nor fair. The range states of several of the world's plant diversity are developing countries, and the sustainable use of plant species has a crucial role to play in the development aspirations of their populations. The listing of entire genera of plants results in CITES trade controls applying to species which are in no way threatened by trade, and affects livelihoods of people with lower income in the range states, which is against the principles of equity and natural justice. Moreover, Chair, such listings may result in unsustainable utilization of other non-listed species whose conservation status may not be as favorable. Additionally, the use of such a blunt tool, when so many advances have been made in science and technology, points to a collective failure of the Convention to meaningfully resolve issues related to the protection of plants. Such general listings of plants relieve consumer parties of the responsibility of developing identification techniques for the products that they import, and pass on the regulatory and financial burden to the exporting range states. Chair, we wish to emphasize here that wildlife and forests of India are our national treasure, and their protection is ingrained in our cultural and social and religious ethos. Our wildlife and forest laws are amongst the strictest in the world. We have always been supported of providing CITES protection for the species which deserve it and continue to do so. However, we do not support the listing of the non-threatened plant species based on the lookalike criteria unless the parties have exhibited sufficient efforts to develop identification tools for the species which individually qualify for being listed in Appendix 2. The use of such listings will result in alienation of local communities and erosion of trust in the Convention. Today, our communities are suffering from the consequences of this approach. More parties will have the same problem if this continues. We do not believe that such an approach is tenable in the long run. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India, and I take it you're making a general point, which is perhaps broader than this proposal alone. If you just give me a moment while I consider the best way forward. I think 1 moment. So yes, I did say that I would go back to the co-proponents and ask them, based on what they've heard from the parties here and the various suggestions, if they had a preference for a way forward. So, European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to all parties that have raised their voice, and we respect all positions, of course, very much. Still, we believe that the listing criteria are met and the species or the genus desires a listing on Appendix 2. I think there was consensus that the deletion of CITES is agreed. On the question of the delay, while we share the concerns of the UK, we believe that in this case, if range states really strongly believe that this delay is needed for implementation, we could facilitate that and accept a delay of 24 months.
So thank you, delegates, for all your thoughts on this. I see that parties are sort of suggesting further discussions, but I also hope that after the session was suspended last night, there would have been some of those discussions to see if there was a combined way forward. Or a consensus on a way forward. It doesn't seem to me that there is a consensus. It seems to me that there is still opposition to this proposal. So my intention, I think, is to try and determine this proposal now and put it to a vote. Clearly, I don't want to keep deferring agenda items, endlessly waiting for things to happen that might not be the case. And so that is my intention, but I'm just going to make sure that because we've got various amendments proposed that we do this, I get everything correctly. So I will come back to you very shortly. One moment. So before I move forward, I forgot when making my announcements at the start of this session to invite the chair of the Credentials Committee to give us an update on credentials, and that's clearly an important issue when we come to a vote. So if the chair of the Credentials Committee, could we give the floor to Morocco? I hope she's here.
Thank you, Chair. The committee met this morning for the credentials that had been received by the Secretariat. We've approved new credentials. The status today, this morning, is that we have 151 parties.
We're not getting English translation.
Can anyone hear the English booth?
Resolve that. Okay, Morocco, if you want to continue probably from the start, please.
Est-ce que vous pouvez reprendre depuis le début parce que
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to repeat. So the committee met this morning to verify credentials which arrived to the Secretariat and new letters were approved. So this
One moment, the English translation isn't working.
un moment, on a encore des problèmes de traduction vers l'anglais.
Chair, can you hear the English booth? Can anyone hear the English booth? hear the English booth. If anyone can hear the English booth, please wave.
Hello, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Hello.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Hello, can you hear the English booth? Can you confirm? Thank you. Thank you.
Start again, please.
Thank you, Chair. The committee met this morning to verify credentials which were sent to the Secretariat. The current situation is that 151 parties are present and 141 letters have been accepted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair of the Credentials Committee. Just let me get my papers in order. So we're about to start the voting procedure. So during the voting procedure, we can't have delegates walking around here and no observers in the part of the room which is reserved for delegates. As we go, once the vote is open, for the 40 seconds that it is open, then there are no photographs allowed of the delegates area. Once the vote is over and the results are displayed on the screen, then of course you can take photos. So I ask all delegates to take your seats ready for the vote. Once I start the voting procedure, we won't be allowing people to wander around. So please take your seats and be ready for the vote. So this is a vote for proposal number 48. It has been amended so that seeds are removed from the annotation, and it now complies with annotation #17. And the proposal would be annotated that entry into effect of the inclusion in Appendix 2 would be delayed by 24 months. The voting is by a normal vote, and the vote of the European Union will be cast by the delegation of the European Union. This is a vote on a substantive matter, and so it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. If you vote yes, you are voting in favor of the proposal, and if you vote no, you are voting against it. So I'm just going to check with the technicians that everything is okay.
Chairman, we are ready to vote.
Right, so a reminder, no wandering about. Please take your seats and stay in them. Sorry, a request from the floor from Bolivia. What's...
Nuevamente, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at Article 24, paragraph 27, I would like to request that it be a secret ballot. Given the complexity of the matter, I would like to request that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia. Unfortunately, I had started the voting procedure. And once I've started the voting procedure, then I can't accept a request for a secret ballot. I gave a long indication rather, of my intention to go to a vote, so there was ample opportunity for parties to do that. So we now move on. The technicians say everything is in order, and you have 40 seconds to cast your vote, and the ballot is
Chair,
open.
not all the delegates have been seated yet in the delegate seats.
Thank you. Delegates, will you take your seats, please? So please take your seats and remain in them. So, with that, the ballot is open now. Thank you. Technicians, will you please show the results on the main screen, please? So this proposal, as amended, is recommended by this committee for adoption. This is a normal vote, so will technicians now show the individual votes of parties on the main screen, please? Okay, I think this has gone round once already, so you should all have been able to check your vote by now. So we can now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a document 84.2, standard nomenclature for dipteryx species. This document has been submitted by the European Union and its member states. And I invite them to introduce it. European Union, you have the floor. You have the floor now, European Union. Sorry, it took a while for the mic to get to you.
Are you talking about this one? Sorry. I made it in Spanish, right?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. We're just very happy here, so we're just doing a bit of moving. So thank you. So we'd like to introduce our document on standard nomenclature for diptera species. So I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. We note that the taxonomy of diptera species remains unresolved, and in order to avoid any misinterpretation of the listing, now that Proposal 48 has been adopted and the EU has submitted its document 84.2 on the standard nomenclature. This document suggests the adaptation of Carvalho et al. 2020 as the standard reference for the genus, and this is supported by the Secretariat and the Nomenclature Specialist of the Plants Committee. It also proposes to direct the Plants Committee to evaluate nomenclature issues related to diptera species and provide recommendations to CoP20. And the European Union also and its member states agreed to the minor proposed edits to the decisions by the Secretariat as outlined in the document. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. Are there any requests from the floor from other parties? I don't see any. Okay, I can invite comments from observers, if any. Oh, sorry, I see the United States. I beg your pardon. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It's not clear to us, I'm sorry, if whether they are recommending adopting the standard reference at the present meeting. Thank you.
Well, I can go back to the European Union and ask them, but that was my understanding. So EU, do you want to provide clarification?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we would suggest the adoption of Carvalho et al. 2020 as the standard reference, and we note that this is supported by the Secretariat and the Nomenclature Specialist. However, we would ask the Plants Committee to evaluate the issues related to dipteryx, I think as we had some discussions on that yesterday, and provide recommendations to COP20. So we still have time to work on the standard reference and the nomenclature for this in the Plants Committee as well. Thank you. But for the moment, yes, we would suggest this as the standard reference.
Does that clarity help you, United States? Yes. I see no other requests from the floor, so we adopt the draft decisions in document 84.2 as amended by Secretariat and the adoption of the suggested standard nomenclature. So with that, we will move on to our next agenda item. Just give me a moment to sort out my papers. So the next item on our agenda for this morning is Proposal 44 on Handroanthus, Rhosiodendron and Tabebuia species. The proponents are Colombia, the European Union and Panama. So I invite one of the proponents to introduce this proposal. One of you care to press the button or request the floor? Panama, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope all the parties are enjoying being in Panama. On behalf of Colombia, the European Union, and Panama, we are pleased to present Proposal 44 to include in Appendix 2 of CITES a series of trees known as the trumpet tree and the ipe. And we want to also apply annotation 17, which includes logs, sawn wood, veneer sheets, plywood, and transformed wood. Many meet the criterion B of Annex 2A of ResConf 9.2a. And there are also difficulties with identification, and because there's also some uncertainty over nomenclature, and the timber from the various species cannot be distinguished microscopically nor macroscopically. They are distributed throughout Latin America and in countries of the Caribbean. Doandros, Dremra, and Tebula are found in various different areas with different types of forest, and the IUCN Red List has evaluated 50 Tabebuya, Androandros, Androsodendron species, and it's classified as in danger in the IUCN Red List, with a population trend which is threatened by international trade. And they are also, some of the species are found at critical danger of extinction in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, as well as Panama. Ipe species face various threats such as deforestation, human development, and mining, and the industrial development of the Amazon, and forest fires, and the reduction in species such as American mahogany also threatens ipe. So in Brazil, for example, between 2010 and 2016, 170,000 cubic meters. And in Peru, the numbers were large. In Suriname, there were 6,000 cubic meters. And in Venezuela, we also saw large amounts of these species. Between 2007 and 2017, and more than 16,000 of various species, 40,000 cubic meters of various species were taken. The main consumer countries are the United States, France, Belgium, China, and the Dominican Republic. There's a great deal of illegal trade with ipe. During an ipe operation in Brazil, the equivalent of 6,200 lorry loads were found. And we have seen large seizures in many countries, including in Peru, where the government of Peru found the laundering of illegal timber. Around 37% of national production had been laundered. The ipe species of the 3 genera in this proposal meet the criterion of CITES to be included in the appendices. So we call on all parties to support their inclusion in the appendices so that we can protect these species in their natural environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Panama, for your introduction. And I now open the floor to parties for any comments on this proposal. I see Brazil, followed by Argentina. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving us the floor. And Brazil opposes Proposal 44 for similar reasons as we opposed Proposal 48. I will refrain from repeating all the reasoning I made yesterday when we debated on Proposal 48. But I would like to emphasize that in our view, there is no robust scientific data justifying the submission of these species included in this proposal to the protective regime under CITES Appendix 2. And this evaluation was made clear on the assessment by the Secretariat, which noted, and I quote, "The Secretariat notes that the supporting statement would benefit from updated biological and trade information for all species concerned, as well as strengthened species-specific trade information, as the proposal largely relies on the information available for 2 out of the 113 species covered by the 3 genera concerned." And I repeat, 2 out of 113. I want to remember that the International Timber Trade Organization also raised concerns and required more justification, including the experience of the countries, of the range states. Brazil has the biggest population in this species. The Ipe is a Brazilian national tree and is not threatened in our country. It's not even in the verge of becoming threatened. Moreover, as it happens to dipteryx, our exportations of Ipe timber, almost all of our exportations come from sustainable management projects approved and monitored by our government. Therefore, trade is not contributing to the decline of dipteryx of Ipe population in our country. Quite the opposite. I remember sustainable management projects are part of our policy to avoid to keep the forest up, to avoid deforestation. When we create new bureaucratic and barriers to trade, and when we increase costs, we are disencouraging these projects. We are allowing for people who live in the forest try to look for other ways of surviving. And we are talking about, in many cases, traditional communities, indigenous people. I would also remember that Brazil has our information control and management systems can be considered to be among the most robust in the world. All of our control and management systems are digital now. So our country is well equipped to declare, to say that the wood that comes from the Ipe woods that we export it comes out, almost all of them comes from the sustainable management project, sorry. And finally, we would like to remind that we are creating a new burden to our CITES authorities and risking divert efforts and resource which would otherwise be focused on species that are effectively under some threat of extinction to controlling Ipes which aren't endangered in our country. So I'm sorry for being so quick, but what we would like is to urge parties to consider range stage perspectives on these species and to oppose this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I give the floor to Argentina, followed by Bolivia.
Thank you, Chair. In principle, first of all, Argentina would like to thank the proponents of this proposal. In Argentina, we only have 2 of those species. We would like to note the status in terms of internal and external expert. We think it's therefore appropriate to support the inclusion of Androgynous rhododendron and tabebula to ensure sustainability and control of their trade.
Thank you. Argentina. I give the floor to Bolivia.
Thank you, Chair, for giving us the floor. The proposal 44, similar to 48, harms indigenous peoples. We'd like to remind you that to stress that indigenous peoples are part of the biodiversity. If we don't protect them and if we oblige them to change so that they migrate to the urban areas, this will reduce seriously the indigenous peoples. Many of us here have visited our countries, and one of the attractive points or the attractions is to visit indigenous peoples, and therefore there is a responsibility to ensure that we make decisions that will not undermine these indigenous peoples. We have sustainable management of forests in Bolivia in keeping with current standards. The Mother Earth law respects the indigenous peoples, and therefore we think that this aspect should be taken into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bolivia. I'll give the floor to Peru, and then Colombia have requested the floor. So Peru and then Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, we'd like to thank the proponents of this proposal with regard to Peru. In keeping with the analysis carried out by the FAO of the 35 species of rhododendron and tabebula, many are classified as not threatened or minimally threatened. National trade is also very limited. It is recommended that the parties focus their efforts on species that really require CITES regulation to avoid international trade being a threat to their survival. There could be an additional burden on CITES parties which will not be in favor of the implementation of the convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. I'll give the floor to Colombia. You have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. We believe that there are significant volumes of these species. The loss of woods and illegal trafficking of these species need to be taken into account. We'd like to thank the co-proponents, and we'd like to highlight that in Colombia, these form part of restricted ecosystems and need to be taken into account. In Colombia, these species are considered to be endangered, and between 2019 and 2021, large amounts have been harvested, and for this reason, we would urge the parties to consider the inclusion of these species. Thank you.
European Union, you're requesting the floor. I will always, with any proposal, always come back to the proponents at the end of a debate, just for their reflections. But European Union, if you want to speak, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Just to reiterate that Handranthus ceratifolius is listed as globally endangered by IUCN, and Handranthus impetigonosus is assessed as near threatened. We believe that the threat criteria is definitely met, and of course there is a huge volume in trade, so we don't see why the criteria would not be met in this case. This is our comment on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, European Union. I will invite, there are no further requests from parties at the moment, so I'll invite any interventions from observers. Right, I see SSN, then the International Wood Products Association. So SSN, you have the floor.
Sí. Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chairman.
For international environmental law.
We would like to thank the proponents, Panama, Colombia, and the European Union, for submitting this excellent proposal. It is an example which the states, the range states as well as importing states, recognize a threat and are working together to combat this, protecting a number of endangered species and regulating their international trade. The proposal will allow range states to achieve sustainable use of these species and guarantee their conservation through the processes of certification, through CITES certificates. This will regulate national trade among range states. The three genera are significantly distributed in Latin America, the Caribbean, Mexico, and the United States. Many species of these genera are endemic. And in a single country or in a number of countries, they are listed as being threatened. The timber products are difficult to distinguish at microscopic level. We've heard as in the Dipteryx proposal, there are difficulties in distinguishing species. The species subject to this proposal amply cover the criteria of Appendix 2 in Resolution 1924, including them in the general list, will not prevent trade, but will guarantee that they can be traded in a sustainable manner, and above all, legally contributing to the fact that these species will continue to exist for future generations. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, SSN. I give the floor to the International Wood Products Association.
Thank you. I'm making this intervention on behalf of the International Wood Products Association. A number of studies, both current and forthcoming, map millions of adult ipe trees in Brazilian forests alone. Two examples are the recent studies by Embrapa on the occurrence of Ipe in Mato Grosso and Acre, which mapped more than 40 million adult trees of the species, as well as a soon-to-be-released Embrapa study on the occurrence of Ipe in Para, concluded that, and I quote here, the possibility of including the species mentioned in CITES Appendix 2 with the justification that legal forest management activities pose a threat to the Ipe is contrary to all the technical knowledge that underlies the current legislation based on the sustainability of the activity. Considering that the idea that the native forest management is the main activity that guarantees forest conservation and biodiversity is widely disseminated, end quote. The current incidence of Ipe, when combined with current knowledge of the growth and structure of the species, carrying capacity of the forest environment, stock of natural forest under management, and reproductive maturity, indicates that treated Ipe is not detrimental to its survival. It's also worth noting what the International Tropical Timber Organization notes in CoP19 document 89.3A4, and I quote, trade statistics presented in the proposal are not up to date. The proposal should include trade data for at least the past 10 years and should correctly indicate the major species in international trade. The proposal should describe how international trade has impacted the conservation of the species and substantiate if such trade is a threat to their wild populations. End quote. Parties should also consider the positions of some of the primary exporting parties. Some of those have spoken here today, including Brazil and Bolivia, which have to date not indicated support for the proposal. In summary, IWPA is hopeful that parties will oppose adoption. If this is passed, IWPA would strongly recommend an implementation period of at least 24 months, similar to Kumru, as listing Ipe will have huge impacts on trade, and the volume of trade will create a significant burden on the regulatory authorities tasked with implementation. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective.
Thank you, International Wood Products Association, and we note your suggestion, but such a proposal needs to come from parties. I could go back to the proponents for their reflections, but what I've heard is clearly that there are a number of parties that feel strongly against this proposal, but from the limited interventions from the rest of the floor, but recognizing clearly a significant number of parties were co-proponents, it seems to me that the kind of bulk of opinion is probably in favor. So I would like to go back to those parties that expressed their opposition to see if they want to block consensus or whether they feel they could live with this proposal as it stands. Thank you. So Bolivia, then Brazil. I welcome your reflections. Thank you.
Thank you once more. I see that the dice are thrown. I would like to see the implementation given a delay of 24 months, and if it were possible for the proponents to accept that we hold a working group to analyze once more the subject. But in any case, we'd like to say that the resources are not sufficient, and we would hope for support from friends of Bolivia to assist us in implementing this within a similar time frame to the previous proposal, one of 24 months. And I hope this suggestion could be taken into account. Thank you.
So, Bolivia, as I understand your proposal, you are suggesting an amendment with a delay of 24 months, as we had on the previous proposal. And and you're also looking for a working group and clearly technical support if the proposal was adopted. But Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the amendment proposed by Bolivia to say that if approved, Brazil would support this 24 months delay in the implementation. However, we are not in the position to support the proposal. The many data has been brought about demonstrating that this species, the IP, is not threatened in our country, which has the biggest population of the species. And moreover, as we've been emphasizing, trade is not detrimental to the species in our experience. On the contrary, when we are giving the message that if approved, we would be sending the message that some of our national policies aimed at the conservation of the forest are not encouraged. So we still do not support the proposal. Thank you.
I see a request on the floor from the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As outlined in the previous proposal, number 48, the UK has strong reservations and concerns that a 24-month delayed implementation will have negative consequences for these three genera, as well as other timber listings. And so we would support this proposal, but as it was originally proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. But there has been an amendment proposal by Bolivia that was supported by Brazil. And Brazil, at least, has indicated that they are not willing to go along with the consensus. And so I think the only way forward is to vote again on this proposal. And as the amendment proposal reduces the scope or is less restrictive than the original proposal, then that is the one that we need to consider first. So I could ask the proponents if they wish to offer any reflections, but otherwise I'm intending to go to a vote. So, okay, I see a request from Canada. Do you wish to speak? You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Canada, like the UK, also has concerns with the amendment proposed by Bolivia and the the movement toward having a 24-month delay. Canada has heard your summary, Chair, and we understand that therefore a decision first needs to be made on the amendment as was agreed in Rule 25.5. So if we move to a vote, we would seek clarity on if we are voting on whether or not to accept the amendment first. Thank you, Chair.
So that's a good question, Canada, and we're just going to consult and make sure that we get things right in relation to the rules of procedure. Thank you. So thank you, Canada, for your intervention. A very helpful one. We need to make sure we get the now amended rules of procedure correct. So in this case, I should clarify that there is a proposed amendment by Brazil and Bolivia which reduces the scope. How we're going to vote now under Rule 25.5 is to agree if the amended proposal should in effect supersede the original proposal. And it is therefore a procedural matter requiring a simple majority. So that is the issue that we are going to vote on. And depending on the outcome of that vote, we would then decide the proposal with or without an amendment. So just give me a moment. I see the request from the floor, Panama, and I'll come back to you in a moment, but I just want to ask the European Union on a procedural matter like this. It's not clear from your information document how you would vote. Will you be voting as the delegation of the European Union, or will you be voting individually by member states?
Thank you, Chair. And in this case, it's a procedural matter. It would be the member states.
Thank you, European Union. And now give the floor to Panama.
Thank you, Chair. We would like all parties be sure that the voting that will take place now would be with a lesser ambition and not the original proposal. We would like for the chair to clarify this.
So thank you, Panama. It is good, the rules have changed for this Conference of the Parties, so we do need to be clear. So the vote that we're now going to do is a procedural vote, and it is to decide whether the amendment proposed by Bolivia and supported by Brazil should supersede the original proposal. If the vote is carried, then that is the proposal that we will then put to a substantive vote, which would then require a 2/3 majority. So that's, and of course, if the vote doesn't pass, then the proposal isn't amended, and we vote on the original proposal as it stands. So I hope that's clear, and parties understand that, but the European Union are requesting the floor.
Thank you, Chair, but you explained exactly what I was had intended to ask you. Thank you.
Right. Okay, I see Brazil down at the United States. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brazil would like a clarification on procedural matters. In this case, if we have a proposal and an amendment to the proposal which is, in our view, less restrictive, has least restrictive effect on trade, shouldn't be applied Rule 25.6 of the Rules of Procedure of the Conference of the Parties to first start voting on the proposal with, which have the less restrictive effect on the trade, namely the original proposal with the amendment proposed by Bolivia.
So yes, Brazil, we would take a least restrictive approach first, but under Rule 25.5, it says any representative, any delegate can make a proposed amendment to a proposal to reduce its scope or make it more precise, and as chair I can allow discussion of that. But the amended rule now goes on to say if consensus cannot be reached, and there was opposition to going to a 24 months delay, then the proposed amendment shall be put to a vote. And if that proposed amendment is accepted, then that amended proposal should supersede the original proposal. And then we would vote on the amended proposal. So that is our interpretation of the rules. So I hope that helps to clarify things for you. But I see the United States asking for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the United States here is still confused why it is a procedural vote. And if you could clarify why, under that rule, this is considered procedural rather than an amendment to narrow the scope.
Thank you, and we'll just clarify that. So thank you, United States, and we are discussing it. We need to get this right. We understand that. And as the point was raised by Canada and the chair of the Standing Committee, we wonder if, as chair of the Standing Committee, you would be willing to provide your understanding of what was agreed there and subsequently what we adopted. That would be helpful for us. Thank you. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I do appreciate that we are in new territory, so I will try to be clear based on my understanding. So firstly, Chair, I, like you, have heard a proposed amendment from Bolivia and Brazil, and I have heard opposition to that amendment from Canada and the United Kingdom. So the amendments to Rule 25.5 that were adopted in plenary are to deal specifically for when an amendment to reduce the scope of a proposal is presented. As you read, Chair, it says that if consensus cannot be reached, such as the case here, the proposed amendment shall be put to a vote. So it is my understanding that the first step we need to take is to determine whether or not to accept the amendment proposed by Bolivia and Brazil to reduce the scope by adding a 24-month delay. I would further agree with the United States that we understand this to be a substantive decision requiring a 2/3 majority to pass. That is my understanding of the tenor of the discussions we had when the Standing Committee considered changes to the rules of procedure. I hope that was clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair of the Standing Committee. That's very helpful. As you say, it's uncharted territory, so we want to get it right. I noticed Mexico has asked for the floor, but before going to Mexico, maybe Secretariat, you want to just provide your perspective also?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for taking the time to make sure that the committee share the same understanding. We are applying now the new amended Rule 25.5 that is in the summary record of the CoP19 plenary, number 1, and that add the part mentioned by the Chair of the Standing Committee. We understand that this is a substantive issue. It's just asking the committee to decide on the proposed amendment to the original proposal. There is not a procedural matter here. Is that just you should decide first on the proposal as amended, and if the proposed amended proposal is accepted, the amended proposal shall supersede the original proposal for amendment of Appendix 1 or 2. I hope that clarifies a little bit the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Mexico has been waiting patiently for the floor, so I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that our interpretation with the amendments to Rule 25.5 indicate that there is an original proposal. An amendment proposal has been made to include the temporary concept as with regard to the delay as far as Bolivia and Brazil have indicated. This is not a procedural matter, but we need to vote first of all on the least restrictive effect. If there were a substantive amendment, we would enter into discussions on the substance. So I think we need to vote on the amendment and then move on from there to the next step, and then enter into substantive discussions. There's no need for a procedural vote. The order has been clearly established in Rule 25.5.
So we're just doing a few more consultations. As I say, we want to get this right because this is the first time, in this committee anyway, where we've trying to make sure that we are interpreting the amended version of 25.5 for this COP, and we'll come back shortly when we're absolutely certain. I do recognize parties waiting for the floor, but if you could just wait a few moments, or... So just to kind of continue with this, we'll again request the Standing Committee Chair if she could just provide clarity and the way forward. I recognize I have Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia all waiting very patiently, and I have seen you, and I'll give you the floor shortly, but first I invite the Standing Committee Chair to explain things to us again once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the parties for your patience as we work through this. I would also perhaps draw attention to the guidance materials that were prepared by the Standing Committee to support understanding of these changes to the rules of procedure. That might also offer some insight. I will first say that it was the view of the committee that the issues we are discussing are not procedural. So we are only discussing substantive matters with respect to our conversations on Rule 25.5 and 25.6. The change in Rule 25.5 that was agreed at the plenary session of this Conference of the Parties is meant to allow for a stepwise approach when there are proposals to reduce the scope of a proposal to amend the appendices, as is the case here. So the stepwise approach would first have the committee considering any amendments to reduce the scope of a proposal. And we have one on the table, as has been noted by our colleague from Mexico. Once the committee makes the decision on whether or not to accept the amendment to the proposal, it moves to the next step of agreeing the proposal. If the amendment that was proposed to reduce the scope is agreed by the committee, then the next step would be to agree the proposal as amended. However, if the committee does not accept the amendment to reduce the scope of the proposal, then it would move on to decision of the original proposal. So it is a two-step process that was envisioned so that parties can very deliberately indicate whether or not they wish to accept an amendment to reduce the scope of the proposal. In my view, Chair, what would be happening here is that, based on the lack of consensus, we would first put to a vote whether or not to accept the amendment to reduce the scope of the proposal, with a yes vote being acceptance and a no vote being rejection of that amendment. We would view that to be a 2/3 majority required for acceptance because it is a substantive matter. If that 2/3 majority is reached, then the proposal is considered amended by this committee and it supersedes the original proposal, and we would expect a second decision on then whether to accept that amended proposal or not. I see some nodding up there, so I hope I've been helpful, and I'm happy to continue to try to explain our very complex discussions over the past few years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Standing Committee Chair. That was very clear and very helpful, and we are very grateful for your guidance. I will now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Brazil and Colombia, and I thank you all for your patience. Mexico.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. I believe the amendment to 25.5 is not clearly understood.
The amendment shall be put to a vote.
In case the amendment were accepted by all parties, instead of having two proposals, we would have one on the table. Since there are different opinions, we have two. And so we need to vote on the one that is of least restrictive effect. If we do not vote on the amendment, we think that it would not be balanced. So we reiterate that we have two proposals on the table at the moment, and we need to proceed in accordance with the rule on the least restrictive, the one with least restrictive effect first.
Thank you, Mexico, but I think that is what we're doing. We're looking at an amendment which is less restrictive, and we are making a decision on whether to accept that amendment or not. And then, if we have accepted the amendment, we then go on to vote on it. In effect, as the superseded, that supersedes the original proposal, but we still have to make the second vote, the two-step process described by the chair of the Standing Committee. So I understand your point, but I think this is the process that the rule sets out as it's described, but it is a substantive vote, as the chair from the Standing Committee reminded us after the United States had raised the question. I give the floor now to Brazil, followed by Colombia, and then hopefully we can move on to make a decision on this. So Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the efforts we all are making to clearly understand the new rule of procedure that has been adopted. It's really important that we do not create precedents that would be problematic in the future. And we thank the chair of the Standing Committee for the explanation. I do think that the best way to move forward should be to vote only, a vote with the scope limited to the amendment proposed, and if the amendment is proposed, then the next step, if the amendment is adopted, the next step is to vote on the whole proposal amended. And I need to explain that for Brazil, we still do not support the proposal amended or not. The only thing is that if approved, we would suggest, we would prefer it to be as with the amendment. So we cannot vote in the first step cannot be to vote the whole proposal amended. So the idea is to vote our idea, and I think that's your idea also, Mr. Chair, to vote, to limit the first vote to the approval or not of the amendment, and then we move further to the whole proposal amended or not, depending on the decision. I would finally, I would like to ask for a clarification. Did we have consensus on the same amendment on proposal 48? Because I don't remember, we didn't have this discussion there. Thank you.
So thank you, Brazil. And we agree with the steps you outlined, and clearly parties might decide to vote for an amended proposal, but then once it's amended, still vote against it. They have the right to vote any way they please, and a vote for an amendment doesn't imply a vote for an amended proposal, if you understand that. So you raised a question about the previous proposal, and my understanding and the way I read the room is that there was consensus on the amendment originally proposed for the 24-month delay. It was accepted by the proponents. Nobody spoke against it. On this occasion, we did have, I think, 2 parties that spoke against the amendment. So that's the difference. So I think we did the correct thing on the previous proposal. I think we are now about to do the correct thing here. So thank you. If we have a kind of common understanding. I have Colombia. You've been waiting also very patiently, and then the United Kingdom. So Colombia, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. We just wanted to clarify and thank you for the discussions we've been having, and that as far as the co-proponents are concerned, we agree with the amendment of the 24 months of delay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Colombia. But whether the co-proponents agree or not, there wasn't consensus in the room, which is why we're in the position we are now. But I go to the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We don't want to complicate matters on the proposal at hand, and we agree with the way set forward. We'd just like to put on the record that we did disagree with the last one, so we might need to revisit the last proposal, subject to the process taken on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, UK, and we'll note that on the record. And yes, of course, you're free to raise things in plenary if you wish, later stage. So, right, I now have 3 more requests from the floor. So if we could maybe deal with these and then move on to actually making a decision under Rule 25.5. So European Union, followed by the United States, followed by Bolivia. So EU.
Thank you, Chair. And if I understand all this complicated matter right, all votes that are going to be taken are on substantive matters, which means that in that case, the EU casts the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union, and thank you for clarifying that. United States?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The U.S., in reaction to the UK's comments on the previous proposal, wishes to note for the record that Rule 24.2 allows the proponents to amend the scope of the proposal. And so we didn't need to go to a vote on the amended one because the proponents can amend the proposal at any point. We just want to get these rules of procedure right that we adopted, so we would like that noted. And if someone wishes to raise dipteryx in plenary, it is not because we didn't follow the rules properly. Thank you.
And that means we don't need to vote on whether to accept the amendment.
Thank you, United States, and we will record your intervention, and thank you for that comment. Bolivia, final request from parties, and then not the final request, New Zealand. So Bolivia, then New Zealand, and hopefully we can then maybe move on. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Thank you once more for giving me the floor. The only thing I wanted to say is that if we we'll be following the same procedure as in the last proposal, 48. One of the proponents, Colombia, is in agreement to accept the amendment. So I would suggest that the proponents meet Colombia, the European Union, and Panama, and that this afternoon we have consensus between the proponents in the same way as we had for proposal 48. Thank you.
So thank you for that comment. I think we've only heard from one proponent, and there were the European Union and Panama as well, and I don't know what their position is, but I'll give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from the United States intervention, I believe the proponents have agreed to a 24-month delay in implementation, and so are effectively amending their proposal, and therefore I don't feel as though we need that 2 votes. We just simply vote on the amended proposal that the proponents agreed to.
So I'll give the floor to Panama, and then again we'll try to move on. Panama, you have the floor.
Sorry about that, President. Thank you. So yeah, we agree with what New Zealand just said. As Colombia said, the co-proponents are okay with the amendment, so it will be just 1 vote. If the co-proponents were not okay with the amendments, then I believe it will be 2 votes. That's our understanding, yeah, from hearing from the parties and from the Secretariat.
Okay, Panama, then European Union has requested the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and it seems we could simplify the procedure because all co-proponents would amend the proposal with 24-month delay.
Okay, so under Rule 24.2, we've now got an agreement from all the co-proponents to move to a 24-month delay. And that perhaps satisfies some of the objections to this proposal. And so we could, if need be, move to a vote just on the proposal as amended by the co-proponents. However, just turning to those parties that have the greatest concerns about it, would you be willing to live with this as consensus, or would any parties still really want to take it to a vote? So I just throw that out now, given the kind of discussion that we've had. But if there is still no consensus, then it will be a more straightforward voting procedure for our proposal as amended by the co-proponents. I'm not seeing any requests from the floor, so I'm going to take silence that we have accepted this proposal as amended by the proponents, and the amendment is that the entry into effect of the inclusion in Appendix 2 is delayed by 24 months. And clearly we've had quite a long and quite an instructive debate on paragraph 25.5 of the Rules of Procedure. I think it will stand us in good stead for the future. But I see, Israel, you're requesting the floor.
Yes, we would like to interrupt you on a point of order. From our understanding, you had called for a vote. And once you call for a vote, there was discussion on that vote, and the vote should have taken place. It's unclear to us why the vote was withdrawn or stopped, and we would, as a point of order, wish to go back to the point where the vote was being called already.
So I understand the point you're making, Israel, but I'm not sure that there is much advantage, really. There is consensus in the room, and I think it's better that we all move forward in this. I can't remember my precise wording from however long ago it was, whether I said I had started the voting procedure or just talked about my intention to take it to a vote. And I would probably need someone to look through the text of all the debate that we've been having here. But I don't think there's anything served by taking something to a vote now on which there is a consensus in the room. So unless there's any further objections, I think we can close the debate on Proposal 43. And thank you all for your consideration and the discussion that we've had on this topic. Sort out my papers, if you give me a moment. And if I said 43 inadvertently, then that was a mistake and it was meant to be Proposal 44. So on our agenda for today, we will now move on to Proposal 46, which is on Aphzelia, pod mahoganies, and a range of proponents: Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, European Union, Liberia, and Senegal. And I invite one of the proponents to introduce the proposal. I have a request from Brazil. Oh, sorry, you have a point here.
Of order. Sorry,
Sorry,
Mr. Chairman. It's not clear for us. We were discussing proposal 44, and we understood that the proponents agreed with the amendment, but we did not vote on the proposal amended itself. Because we do not support the proposal.
So I understand that. As I was wrapping up, I was saying if there are any objections to adopting the proposal with as amended by the co-proponents. And I didn't see any requests from the floor. I did wait for quite a while. And on that basis, it seemed to me that consensus had been reached. Brazil, you want the floor again, and then Panama?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. We have expressed previously that we would not support the proposal if amended. We were waiting for you to open the vote on the proposal amended. I'm sorry, but it's not fair.
Okay. I see a request from the floor from Panama. I'll take that and intervention from Panama, and then I'll come back, Brazil, to your point, and we will try to make sure that we're going forward collectively and try to avoid any misunderstanding. But Panama, you have the floor, and then I will try and resolve the issue. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe that the rules are clear. We've had a lengthy discussion on the rules of how to vote with regard to this point. And as you said a while ago, if you said nobody asked for the floor to oppose it, and so we think that this point has been reserved. Thank you.
Okay. I thought I was clear in what I was saying, but perhaps it is now also clear that people took a different interpretation of what I was trying to say. I was asking that as the proposal had been amended by the co-proponents, which would have been under Rule 24.2, I was then asking if there were any objections to adopting that, given that it perhaps met some, if not all, of the concerns of parties that were not in favor originally of the proposal. However, clearly both you, Brazil, and Israel thought that you were waiting for a vote. And I think probably to sort out this situation, the best thing now is to put it to a vote. And clearly, maybe I should have done things better first time round. And it's taken us quite a long time to find our way through that. But I think probably that's the only way to resolve this issue now and make sure that we avoid complications later on. So if parties are willing to do that, then I think that is the best way forward. And it's been a long, complicated debate. It's been an instructive debate. I think we've probably all learned a few things about how the new rules of procedure are to be applied, and that will hopefully stand us in good stead. So, I will continue, and I will begin the voting procedure. So this is a vote for proposal number 44, as amended, and the amendment reads, as I said before, that the entry into effect of the inclusion in Appendix 2 is delayed by 24 months. This is a normal vote. The vote of the European Union will be cast by the delegation of the EU. This is a substantive matter that requires a 2/3 majority to pass. And with that, I'm just going to check with the technicians that all the settings are correct. And while the technicians are checking things, just a reminder, we're going to a vote. So for all delegates to be seated, for no observers to be in the area reserved for delegates. And I see people walking around, and please, once the vote is underway, no one will be allowed in or out of the delegates area. No photographs of the delegates area during the vote, but you can, of course, vote afterwards. So please take your seats and make sure you're ready for the vote. And I've got a thumbs up from the technicians, so we're ready to go. So just to remind parties, if you vote yes, you're voting in favor of the proposal as amended. If you vote no, you're voting against it. You have 40 seconds to cast your vote, and the ballot is open now. Thank you, technicians. If you could display the results of the vote on the screen, please. And if you can show the individual votes of parties on the screen now also. So I think we've all seen the result, and based on the percentage, and clearly there was more than a 2/3 majority, and so Proposal 44 is recommended for adoption with the amendment as read out. So we now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is Proposal 46, Aphelia species, and the proponents are Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, European Union, Liberia, and Senegal. So I invite one of them to Israel, do you want to take the floor again, or is it on this item or the previous one still?
I apologize again for interrupting with a point of order, but from what we heard for the last half hour, very clearly explained by the Standing Committee Chair and by yourself, was that the first round would be whether to approve or not approve making an amendment to the proposal, and then there would be a second round on the actual proposal. So we did the first round on whether to accept the amendment or not. That, as you said, passed. Now we are expecting a vote on the proposal as it was originally proposed. And we haven't voted on the proposal yet. We've only voted on whether to accept an amendment to the proposal or not. And we're expecting now a vote on the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
I thought I was clear again, but all the co-proponents supported an amendment. They agreed to amend the proposal under Rule 24.2, and therefore they have the right to do that as proponents, and the proposal was amended. So we then voted on the substance of that proposal, whether we adopt it or not. I thought I made that clear. So that was the vote. We don't need, in this occasion, to go to a second vote because we're not doing this under Rule 25.5, but the amendment was under Rule 24.2. So that is the approach that we took, and that, therefore, is why we have the decision that I read out. But Japan, you have also requested the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Japan also echoed our distinguished delegation from Israel. It was not clear for voting what. I mean, so that voting, we thought that the voting for, we are accept or not amendment for proposal. Thank you.
Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that we can save time in the future with our discussion these minutes. Our interpretation of 25.5 says if consensus cannot be reached on an amendment proposal, this should be put to a vote. In other words, comparing apples and pears, we have an original proposal. Other parties have proposed an amendment. If there is consensus, and we have to be very careful in our interpretation of the word consensus. In Rule 25.5, there is only one amendment. If there is no consensus, then we have two proposals. The one of less restrictive would be voting on first, and then the second. There's no need to vote we are having three votes. One if we accept or not having two proposals, another on proposal 1 and another on proposal 2. And there's no balance or equity there. Our interpretation of what happened is that in keeping with the Rule 25.5, if there was consensus, since there was one proposal on the table and it was voted on substantively and agreed to by 2/3 of the parties, I think our Israel misinterpreted the rule. I think we need to be clear on this proposal. The proponents, in keeping with Rule 24(2), amended the original proposal. And there was a consensus on Brazil and Bolivia, so there was only one amended proposal on the table. So our suggestion is that after the discussion there is no consensus, then there would be two proposals and we would proceed to a vote in the order of their scope. But then there would be no countries are entitled to propose amendments.
Thank you, Mexico. We'll come back, but we've got a request from the European Union again. So, European Union, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and we understand the difficulties of the discussion and the need to be clear on this, but as the delegation from Mexico recalled just now, the proponents have supported unanimously a reduced an amended proposal. So the original proposal does not exist anymore, it's not on the table. So we are operating under Rule 24(2), which allows parties, proponents, to amend their proposal to reduce its scope at any point in time. And it was clear from the interventions from all the proponents that this was the case. And therefore, there are no two proposals anymore. There's only one proposal, which is the amended one, which is for consideration of the Conference of the Parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, European Union. And that was also the point I was trying to make. The proposal had, under Rule 24.2, any party has the right at any time to withdraw or amend a proposal to reduce its scope. And I heard from all the co-proponents that they were happy to do so. And therefore, the original proposal, as you said, no longer existed. So it was just one vote on the proposal. I thought I had made that clear. I will try to be more clear in future, but I think the result as it remains, as it stands. And with your indulgence, it would be quite useful to move on. Thank you, colleagues, for your cooperation. It has been a long discussion, but hopefully it helps to clarify the way forward if or when these issues emerge in future. So with that, I would like to go back to Proposal 46 and invite, for a final time, I hope, the proponents to introduce it. One of them going to request the floor. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We're glad to present to you Proposal 46 for the inclusion of African populations of the genus Afzelia in Appendix 2. Firstly, we would like to thank the co-proponents, Côte d'Ivoire, Benin, Liberia, and Senegal for their contribution and support. Afzelia is a genus of large paleotropical trees that are widespread across sub-Saharan Africa. The timber is of high quality, being durable in humid conditions and termite resistant, and is sought after for many purposes, also due to its aesthetic quality. Afzelia timber is traded internationally as Ducie or African mahogany. Afzelia species are known to be intensively logged and threatened by overexploitation for the international timber trade. This has led to severe population declines and scarcity of mature sea trees, as noted now during several African regional meetings. The EU is one of the key importers of Afzelia timber, which is mainly exported from Western and Central Africa. Trade data indicates that 15,000 tons of African mahogany has been exported between 2008 and 2014. Accordingly, 4 species, namely Afzelia africana, Pipinensis, Pachyloba, and Quazensis, meet the criteria for listing in Appendix 2 under Criterion B of Annex 2A of Conference Resolution 9.24. Also, since the African Afzelia species are not easily distinguishable from one another based on wood morphological characteristics, and the species are known to be traded interchangeably, inclusion of all other African populations of the genus in Appendix 2 under Criterion A of Annex 2B of Resolution of Conference 9.24 is proposed. This would include a further 3 species. We therefore invite parties to support the adoption of Proposal 46 to include the genus Afzelia in Appendix 2 with annotation number 17, which designate all timber commodities, including logs, sawnwood, veneer sheets, plywood, and transformed wood. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I open the floor for parties to comment. I see Benin, but just to begin with, I'd like to hear from countries that are not co-proponents. So I see Central African Republic, followed by Burkina Faso and Cameroon. You have the floor, Central African Republic.
Thank you, Chair, for having given me the floor. Since this is the first time that the Central African Republic is intervening in this committee, we would like to thank the Republic of Panama and the Secretariat of CITES for having organized this conference, and would like to congratulate you on having been elected to lead this committee. Chair, we need to recall that unlike other African countries where there is disappearance of Afzelia species in accordance with the EU, we are one of the most forested countries with over 15% of our territory covered by forests. In the Sodano sector in Guinea, which covers 95% of the territory, the Afzelia species are abundant and widespread. Forest exploitation provides jobs and revenue to the state, is subject to an agreement between the forestry sector and the government. This requires strict, sustainable exploitation of resources. Furthermore, the CAR has an agreement with the EU to guarantee that wood and its derivatives that are exported to the EU are of legal origin. According to the inventories from 2008 to 2022, Afzelia species are abundant in exploitable volumes, over 92,000 meters cubed. And so for this year, the threat of extinction of Afzelia is not strong and can be included in Appendix 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Central African Republic. I give the floor to Cameroon, then Benin.
Thank you, Chair, for having given me the floor. I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate you once again for the way in which you're steering the work of this committee. I would also like to express Cameroon's position on the species of Afzelia. I will come back to the details of the other species afterwards. Cameroon is a state party of the distribution of the species to be included in Appendix 2. We have expressed reservations on the guidelines with regard to the robustness of the scientific evidence to support the amendment. Presently, international trade is not a cause for the vulnerability of these species. In Cameroon, the rules established from a technical and legal point of view allow us each year the inventories are done at 100%. Recently, Cameroon developed a management information system which is useful and allows us to trace extraction, and their certification is provided, which indicates how seriously this is taken. The level of vulnerability of the species, we have a significant potential with regard to, in terms of constant regeneration. This is in keeping with the structures of the 10 species which would not be affected. There are about 15 species which would be guaranteed by this inclusion. We have difficulties that we are facing with regard to species being included in Appendix 2. We suggest that thorough studies are carried out to obtain additional information. Cameroon is only in favor of consensus. However, with regard to Afzelia and Cayenne, with regard to the arguments that have been submitted, Cameroon is not in favor of the en-bloc inclusion of the species in Appendix 2. We suggest prudence and caution, and we suggest that a working group be set up to further study this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cameroon. I give the floor to Benin.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank you for your leadership of our discussions, and I'm certain this will ensure we have very good outcomes. As a co-proponent, we support this, but given the difficulties in differentiating these timber species and the work in the international trade, we have a species that is very slow growing. We have been convinced in Benin that we should list it in category 1 of our legislation, and we fear that a lack of support in international means will not help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Benin. I'll give the floor now to Gabon, followed by Senegal.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Gabon will be brief in its intervention. Just as Cameroon has said, we do not support this proposal because at our national level in Gabon, the Afzelia species are not under threat from international trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabon, and for your brevity. I give the floor to the Congo and then Senegal. Congo, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. My congratulations on the way you are leading our work. Congo, the Republic of Congo, has signed a voluntary partnership agreement with the European Union under the FLEGT framework, and we have management for our forests. More than 50% of our forests are certified, and I believe more than 50% of our forests are managed. So when it comes to the sustainable management of forestry resources, there is no uncertainty there. So from our point of view, we do not support this proposal because when it comes to these species, we have large numbers and we carry out responsible harvesting, and we only allow 1 per hectare, and so the level of deforestation is around 0.06%. So we do not support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, the Congo. I think I'd said I'd take Senegal next, to be followed by Burkina Faso, China, and Uganda. Senegal.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Senegal is not a forestry state, and we don't export timber, but these species are used in our country on a domestic level. So we support this proposal for the simple reason that listing in Appendix 2 is not just a restriction, but it helps us to manage the resource in a scientific manner to ensure sustainability, traceability, and legality. So it's not a problem for us. This helps us to better understand the resource and the trade that comes from it. So we support this proposal very firmly. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal, Burkina Faso, then China and Uganda.
Thank you very much, Chair. Given that it's the first time that Burkina Faso takes the floor in this committee, we would like to congratulate you on your election to the chairmanship of the committee. And we'd also I'd like to congratulate you on the good leadership. We thank Panama also for the organization of this conference and the warm welcome that we have received. Chair, Burkina Faso is a range state of Afzelia. It is a species that is subject to many pressures, and that means that it should be added to the list of species. That is, it's already covered by our national laws, and we believe that listing in Appendix 2 will encourage a better conservation of the species. That is why Burkina Faso supports the proposal made by Côte d'Ivoire and the co-proponents. Thank you.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I give the floor to China, then Uganda, then Côte d'Ivoire. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. China noted that this proposal will involve many range states of the African populations of the Afzelia species. We suggest that the views of all range states on this proposal should be fully considered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. I give the floor to Uganda.
Thank you very much, Chair. Uganda appreciates the proponents who brought this very critical issue to this gathering. And we wish to pronounce that Aphyselia as a species does exist in Uganda and in the neighboring countries. And we have observed a lot of illegal transactions that are taking place with this very species, some of which comes from the neighboring countries. We have, through our enforcement operations, impounded so many consignments, and this can be evidenced when you go to our forestry yard. You will find a lot of this species collected there, and is threatening the existence of this species, even within Uganda itself. And therefore, Uganda as a range state is very, very much in support of listing this species so that the trade in it is well regulated, so that we save it from extinction due to commercial purposes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I give the floor to Côte d'Ivoire, followed by Kenya and Zambia. Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Chair. Côte d'Ivoire, as a co-proponent of this proposal, would like to draw all parties' attention to the levels of deforestation that is ever growing in Africa. Afzelia also suffer from a loss of habitat and the effects of climate change. It is undeniable that there is a strong international demand for this species. So the proposal aims to guarantee its sustainable management. And we also raise the issues of the difficulties with identification of the species within trade. And so we encourage all parties to support our proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. I give the floor to Kenya, then Zambia.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Kenya commends the proponents of Proposal 46 and considers it appropriate for listing in Appendix 2 so that it can regulate trade and generate trade on how much the species is being traded. Yeah, we support the proposal.
Thank you, Kenya. So I now give the floor to Zambia, followed by Nigeria.
Thank you, Chair, for giving Zambia the floor. Considering that this is the first time we're speaking, we would like to take this opportunity to thank the host country for the warm hospitality and also congratulate you on your election as chair for this committee. Chair, Zambia supports the proposal to list Afzelia as outlined by the proponents, as we are a range state of this species, or should I say genus, and have also been affected by the illegal trade in this particular tree species. As such, we add our voice in support rather of the of its listing. Thank you.
Thank you, Zambia. I now give the floor to Nigeria, followed by Niger and the Comoros.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. I also want to join my voice, to support this proposal, because the rate of deforestation is quickly eroding the population of this Afzelia. And so there's need to protect this species, from going into extinction. And so I also join my voice to support this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. I now give the floor to Niger, and that's the final request from parties.
Merci bien, monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. As it's the first time we're speaking in this committee, we'd like to congratulate you also on the leadership of the work of Committee 1. And we'd also like to thank the people of Panama and the government for the organization of this conference. In terms of this proposal, we'd like to congratulate not only the proponent countries, but we would also like to state our support. Thank you.
Thank you, Niger. I will open the floor if there's any interventions from observers. I've only one request from Jean Bleu. So you have the floor, but yeah, keep your intervention short, please. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, for giving us the floor. We would like to contribute some scientific information to parties on the Afzelia species. We see that for the majority of parties, trade in a species does not allow a quantification of the reduction of the population. Through our research projects, we have looked at the reduction of the population of the Afzelia ibanensis in the future over 100 years. The simulation takes into account the levels of exploitation in Central Africa with all the methods of use and harvesting and the levels of damage. And we also take into account the loss of habitat due to deforestation in Eastern and Western Africa. So that means that in 100 years, the reduction of the population is of 3% in accordance with the IUCN criteria. This species is not in is not threatened because the reduction of population is below 30%, with a reduction of 3%. The research was financed by the European Union, the French Foundation, Belgium, Germany, through the Sustainable Management Organization. So we would like parties to bear these results in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean Bleu. I have no further requests on the floor. You just give me a moment to check. Thank you, delegates. Just listening to that debate, we've had a range of views expressed, a lot of support coming from range states and some opposition too. It seems to me that probably the balance of the room is likely to be in favor of this proposal. But I do want to go back to those parties that express their opposition, and perhaps Central African Republic, Cameroon, Gabon, and the Congo. Do you want to block consensus, or is this a proposal you could live with, understanding the points that you've made that, and which we have in the record, that you do have significant concerns about it? So if any of those parties in opposition would like to give me an indication about how strongly they feel, whether they could live with consensus or not, that would be of great assistance to me. Thank you. I see Cameroon, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. In our proposal, we suggested the setting up of a working group to look at the discussions.
Thank you, Cameroon, and I noted that, but the Central African Republic, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. The Central African Republic maintains its position and also proposes, if it were possible, to have a working group to reflect further on this proposal. Thank you.
And Gabon, you have the floor, followed by the Congo.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Gabon also aligns itself with the proposal by Cameroon and the Central African Republic to set up a working group. Thank you.
And the Congo, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. As has been said by those who have spoken before me, Congo, Cameroon, CAR, and Gabon would like to see a working group set up. Thank you.
So maybe now to, before finding a way forward, we could go back to the co-proponents. Having heard the debate and the comments from those most opposed, do you have a view on the way forward? So I invite any of the co-proponents to offer their reflections. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So we would firstly like to thank the previous speakers for their input and the range states for their mentioned efforts to protect the genus. We would like to reiterate that indeed the species has a favorable status in some countries, but not in all. There's a lot of decline in Australia and many of the range states as a result of international trade. Also, Senegal pointed out already that Appendix 2 listing would not prevent all trade in Ophelia species, and it can still occur where it is sustainable and non-detriment findings are possible. We would also like to point out that all range states were consulted in April and September of 2021, and their responses can be found in the proposal. We would also like to come back to the comments made by the University of Saint-Bleu, and we would like to ask them provide published information, a publication and a peer-reviewed publication. Thank you.
But do you have any reflections, European Union, on this suggestion for a working group? Do you see any value there? And you have the floor when you've had time to consider.
Thank you. We do not see the necessity to have a working group for this proposal, as there's enough support and, as I said, the criteria are met. Thank you.
Thank you, EU, and I also have reservations as to whether a working group will achieve anything that can't be resolved today. Given that the 4 countries concerned maintain their opposition, I think the only way to resolve this is to go to a vote. So that is my intention, and that will hopefully be possible before we break for lunch. So we're now going to begin the voting procedure. And as before, I remind you all by now to please take your seats, to remain in them during the voting process, for all observers to be out of the delegates area. Just checking, we're still secretariat staff. Please take your seats and make sure your voting cards are inserted. This is a vote for proposal number 46 on Ophelia. It is a normal vote. The vote of the European Union will be cast by the delegation of the EU. It's a substantive vote, so it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. And as before, a vote yes is a vote in favor of the proposal, a vote no is a vote against it. I'm just going to check with the technicians that everything is set up correctly.
Chair, the system is set up, but we still see some delegates who are moving.
So delegates, please remain in your seats. I remind you all of what I've said earlier about photography. So now that everything is set up, you now have 40 seconds to cast your vote, and the ballot is open now. Thank you, technicians. If you could now display the result of the vote on the screen. So clearly, this proposal is adopted, exceeding the two-thirds majority. But if technicians can now display individual votes on the screen so parties can check. So I think we've all had a chance to see. I think it's on its second cycle now. Before we close this session, in a moment I'll ask the Secretariat for any announcements. But just a reminder that when we resume at 2 p.m., we will be starting with fish proposals and proposal 37. So Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. There are 4 working groups meeting at lunchtime at 12:15 today. And as a reminder, the Budget Working Group will be discussing the language strategy in Pacifico 1. The action plan on gender-related matters is in Carib 6. The role of CITES in reducing risk of zoonotic disease emergence is in ISTMO 1. And Sharks and Rays Working Group is meeting in ISMO 2. All of these meetings starting at 12:15. Thank you, Chair.
And with that, the session is now closed. Thank you all for your cooperation on some difficult discussions. Thank you.
We would like to remind delegates to please make sure to remove your card before you leave the room. Please take your voting cards with you. Thank you.